And good evening to all of our attendees and those present. My name is Catherine All, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Kitsap and also the county library system, which is co-sponsoring this forum, I want to welcome you all to the 23rd Legislative Virtual Candidate Forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that doesn't support or oppose political parties or candidates. After careful study and consensus by our members, the League does take positions on issues, and we take action on those positions at the local, state, and national level. The League is a membership organization and depends on our members to organize and run events such as this. We invite and encourage both women and men to become members and help us work on our basic belief that our form of government depends upon the informed and active participation of its citizens. We had many questions submitted by the public, and we've tried to sort them into various topics, and we may or may not get through all of the questions tonight, but we'll get through quite a few. The candidates participating are for Senator Christine Rolfes and Pam Madden-Boyer. If you want to wave. For Representative, position 1, Tarra Simmons and April Ferguson. Okay, and for Representative position 2, Drew Hansen and Elaina Gonzales-Boynton. Okay. Each one of you deserves our thanks for stepping up and running for office. Please be respectful tonight of each other. You each deserve that. At this point, if we were meeting in person, I would ask the audience to give you all a round of applause. And then I'd tell them to be quiet the rest of the evening. But so we're pretending we're hearing that applause because you all do deserve that. The rules for tonight, each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. And after all the candidates have spoken, I will ask questions, and you will each have 1 minute to respond to each question. And so watch the green space up there, which the time will count down for you. And then at the end of the questioning time, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make a closing statement. Okay, let's get started. We will begin with opening statements in the order that the candidates appear on the ballot. So Christine, we'll start with you.
Should we wait? Hi, I'm Christine Rolfes, and I am your state senator, and I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. It has been an unusual campaign season, just like these are unusual times, and so it's nice to have the opportunity to be able to connect in this way, and I look forward to folks' questions. I was elected to the state senator in 2012 and re-elected in 2016, and I worked really hard, not just in Olympia, but all year long to represent the people of our district, to bring our good ideas to Olympia, to make them into public policy, and to provide excellent customer service from my office. A few years ago, I was elected by the senators to be the lead budget writer. So I'm the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. And in that role, I lead senators from around the state to develop our state's $52 billion two-year budget. And then I lead negotiations with the House of Representatives and the governor to come up with a final plan. I have been actively engaged in issues that are important to our district related to military families, public school funding, affordable health care, and supporting our small businesses. And I look forward to everybody's questions and to finding out more about everybody else who's running, since this is the first forum we've all been in together. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Christine. Pam, it's your turn.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Catherine, for the opportunity to speak with people, even though it's a little bit different than it normally would be. My name is Pam Madden-Boyer. I am a retiree from the Central Kitsap School District after about 30 years, and this is my second foray into the political arena, and this has been an extremely challenging year. But it's also been a lot of fun. I have learned a lot. I have met a lot of amazing people, and they are very freely sharing a lot of the needs that this county has. I am a conservative Republican. I am 68 years old, and I used to be a Democrat. And I became involved because I was not seeing the freedoms and the liberties and a lot of the items that I had grown up with all of my life were kind of fading into the background in Washington State. I am now a business owner. I started into business at the tender age of 48 years old. Learned how to negotiate with bankers, learned how to leverage my properties and work with everyone in the state, including the state liquor board. So I am not afraid to tackle anything. And if people tell me it can't be done, I say, watch me. Might take me a little longer, but I'll get it done.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, Tarra, your turn.
Thank you so much to the League of Women Voters and to all the candidates who have stepped up to run and everyone who is watching today on this very important Indigenous Peoples Day. I am Tarra Simmons, and I'm running for the State House in Position 1, 23rd LD. I am a civil rights attorney, a nonprofit director, a national leader in the fight for criminal justice reform. I am also a former nurse working at Harrison Hospital in the emergency room and Martha and Mary in Paulsbo. And I'm a working mom and the wife of a union carpenter. I'm also a person who has overcome significant adversity in my life, from generational poverty to foster care and homelessness to substance use disorder and criminal justice involvement. However, thanks to the resilience that I found in this community, I just celebrated 9 years of sobriety. And for the last 7 years, I've been on a mission to make sure people have a first chance so we won't need a second chance later on in life. For the last 5 years, I've worked in Olympia, working across the aisle to pass bipartisan legislation in the areas of healthcare, education, criminal justice reform, voting rights, and to support our economy. For the last 2 years, I've been mentored by Sherry Appleton, who held this seat for 16 years. So I'm well prepared to carry on her legacy of fighting for the good people and the hardworking people of the 23rd Legislative District. I'm very much looking forward to answering any and all of your questions tonight, and thank you in advance for your thoughtful consideration and your vote for state representative.
Thank you, Tarra. April, it's your turn to go.
My name's April Ferguson. I'm running for 23rd District State House of Representatives, Position 1. One of the things I look forward to every time I run for office is the League of Women Voter Forums, because I have seen them. You guys are actually really fair. You guys do really good forums, and I'm really grateful that you guys are still putting the forums on despite the COVID situation. What got me involved in politics was I was a daycare center owner, and I lost my business, and I sent out emails and pleads to pretty much every state representative, and despite the evidence and what I presented, I lost my business and I lost my ability to work in that field. And I'm a mother of 6 children, and what I learned is that, you know, we really have a duty to preserve our society for future generations. And I'm running because I am a mother. I'm a mother, and I believe that our children are our future, and therefore we owe them the effort to preserve our society and protect their future. Laws that we write today are going to impact our children. They're going to impact generations to come. And as a state representative, I'm going to work to make sure that laws don't defy the proper role of government, that they don't violate individual rights, and that they don't, and that they're fiscally responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew, your turn.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us tonight. My name is Drew Hansen. I am a dad. I have 2 kids in public schools remotely right now. I'm a soccer coach in Kitsap County, or at least I was before the pandemic shut it all down. And I worship with my family at Bethany Lutheran Church, although we worship in cars these days, which actually works surprisingly well. There's like a sound system on a truck and like it's beamed in on the radio. So most relevant to tonight, I'm your current state representative for the 2nd position in 23rd District. I chair the College and Workforce Development Committee, and I spend a lot of time making sure that we have access to college and apprenticeship opportunities here in Kitsap County. So I brought new degree programs in cybersecurity, electrical engineering, and early childhood education to Olympic College in partnership with some of our universities. And before I was in the legislature, I served for a long time on the Olympic College Foundation Board. So that's a lot of where my heart's at, making sure people have opportunities to get trained for decent jobs to support their families. I think like most legislators, the job description has turned in the spring. We're all spending a lot of time trying to help businesses and constituents navigate what's going on with the COVID-19 crisis. And I think there is, there's hope. We're on the right track loosely to getting out of this, but it's going to be a long slog. And we are certainly committed to helping advocate for people in this community who are hurting, need some help, need some flexibility, need some relief, so we can all get through this together. Thanks.
Okay. And Elaina, you get to go now.
Hello, everyone. I am Elaina Gonzales-Boynton. I am running for the 23rd Legislative District for State Rep for Position 2. I have lived in this district for about 6 years now and Kitsap for 30. I'm married to a veteran and we're raising 6 children in Bremerton. 2 of them have grown up and are spreading their wings and going off to doing their different things. So we have 4 left in the house. My father was a police officer and he taught me to love history and to learn about public policy, which is why I'm actually getting my graduate degree right now in public policy and history. And I have served our community in various capacities. I have served as a Girl Scout leader, a Boy Scout leader. I've served as a court-appointed special advocate with foster kids. And my passion is serving our community because I've been doing it for many years. My focus is actually on parental rights. And I am running because I want to continue that service. And I want to bring a new and diverse voice to the legislature. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And it's okay, candidates, if you don't use your entire time, like Elaina just did. Although now we're turning to questions and you just have a minute for each question. So get it out there. The first question is the state budget is challenged by revenue losses due to COVID-19. What are your funding priorities and what cuts would you be willing to make? And Pam, you get to start with this question.
Oh, that's a wonderful thing. Education, number 1, is a funding priority. But one of the major problems that we're showing right now is that even though districts did receive funding during this COVID time, I don't think they have used it wisely in preparing their teachers and thus the parents and the students for dealing with what are the requirements that are going on right now. And the second thing would be to take a broad look at everything. The budget in this state has inflated by almost double in the last decade. And as a government, like I said last night when we were on the Outlaw Radio Network, government produces nothing that can be consumed. So we need to look at lessening the burden of government and increasing the opportunity for businesses to operate successfully.
Thank you. Tarra?
Hi, thank you for the question. I think we've learned through past recessions that austerity measures are going to create, huge problems down the road. And so I would be opposed to cutting anything for our most vulnerable communities, for sure. That includes, education, not just K through 12. Obviously, that's protected through, our constitutional rights, but also community colleges and technical schools, homelessness and affordable housing. We really need to invest more. Our mental health system is not already operating at an appropriate level. And so I really plan to be a champion for progressive revenue and bringing in new revenue sources. I see, we've all seen and felt the impacts of, a reliance on sales tax right now and B&O tax. We really need to look at completely reforming our tax code in Washington State, and I would be opposed to cutting anything from our most vulnerable communities.
Thank you. April, you get to go next. You're muted.
Yep, I'm unmuted now. Okay, to start, there are certain programs and funds in the state you just cannot cut because it involves the well-being and rights of Washingtonians. And those include services for individuals with disabilities and special needs, mental health services, and programs which are protected by Washington State Constitution. Education, you can't cut those. We are experiencing reduced revenue because we have shut down our state. And government all too often grows by creating problems and then crisis to offer solution that in return takes more money from the people. And in the last few years, well, actually under Governor Inslee's leadership, our spending has actually gone up dramatically, over 70% since Inslee was elected. So I think that what we need to be doing is looking at what we're spending things on, why did our spending go up, and we should not be creating more revenue by taking more, by the taxing the people more, but instead we should be looking at what changed.
Thank you, April. Yeah. I know it's hard. Drew, you get to go next.
Thank you. As we're looking at how to deal with the budget, we're going to need a balanced approach on it. We cannot do it with just cuts, we cannot do it with just efficiencies, and we cannot do it with just new revenue. And for the cuts, we want to be sure that we're not repeating some of the mistakes of the last recession when we just, tuition went through the roof and we still haven't recovered from that. We stopped funding higher education as a public good. And as a result, it's a lot harder to afford community college in Kitsap County than it was some years ago. For the new revenue piece, we won't be able to plug all the holes alone, but I'm definitely looking at something like raising some revenue from some of the big technology companies that have done very well in the COVID crisis, which was part of the reason we funded free and reduced tuition for college and apprenticeships. And then for efficiencies, there are things we can look at, which I'm looking at right now across state government, like how much each agency spends on overhead, IT, HR, and so on, and whether we can get some consistency across them to save some money.
Thank you. Elaina?
Hi, so my priorities would be education as it is guaranteed by our state constitution, as well as those adult and family homes, those nursing homes that care for our most vulnerable people. As far as cuts, I would first want to see where our money is going and possibly do an audit, or at least an audit of that serve and return, to make sure that we know where we can make cuts and where we can afford to and afford not to. That way the appropriate places are going.
So you've got some more time. I didn't know.
No, that's okay. I'm good. I'm good now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Christine?
So I want to address a couple of things. Right now, our budget is a $52 billion budget, and more than half of that budget is actually not state spending. It's not state government. It's taxes that are collected by the state and then redistributed to the school districts, 301 school districts around the state. So half of state spending isn't actually state spending, it's school spending. And it's spending that's determined locally. We just send it back to the districts. So the reason that state spending has gone up over the last 7, 8, 10 years is because we were under a court order to increase spending on the K through 12 system. We were also under court order to increase spending on behavioral health. And we have made significant investments over the last few years in forest fire, catastrophic wildfire prevention. So we can talk more about efficiencies and so forth. An audit is not needed. There are spending reductions that can be made without hurting people, and it will be my goal to balance a budget that does that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is, some of you have mentioned it briefly, but what new sources of revenue would you be willing to consider or not to help balance the budget? And what about some of the corporate tax breaks? And Tarra, you get to go first on this one.
Thank you so much. You know, I do, in my campaign, I have, I've taken the No Corporate PAC pledge. I have not taken funding from big corporations. I do think that they are not paying their fair share in our state, and we have one of the most regressive tax systems in the nation. I do think we can pass excessive compensation tax on big corporations who pay their CEOs more than $1 million. I would definitely look at that. I am willing to look at wealth taxes, anything where we can have the wealthiest among us paying more of their fair share. Right now, they're paying a very small percentage compared to working class and low income people because of the nature of our tax system. I know that there is a work group that's been meeting, and they'll have their full report due in December. And I do hope, and one of the committees I hope to serve on is the Finance Committee, and really be a champion for fixing our regressive tax system in Washington State.
Thank you. April?
Washington citizens have already undergone significant losses due to the current crisis. They have had their businesses, income, housing, and well-being impacted. The solution is not dumping the crisis on the people to continue to bear. Government made the decisions impacting its revenue when it shut down the lifeline of our state, and that is our businesses. Increasing revenue by having our businesses and people bear the burden with increased taxes is not the solution. I believe we need to cut unnecessary government spending, which is always difficult, but necessary in the aftermath of a crisis. In regards to, like people talking about how we could get new revenue, capital gain tax, even if we were to do that, it would be setting up an entirely new Department of Revenue hasn't worked with individuals, it's only worked with businesses. So it wouldn't even be an immediate solution if we did bring an income tax. It would take a good, probably a year or so to even get that, the system, the collecting of it set up. So it really isn't a solution for the immediate crisis.
Okay, thank you, April. Drew?
Sure. So let me talk about three very quickly. One would be what I highlighted before, which is an adjustment to the way that we fund the large investment we made in making college and apprenticeships more affordable. We assessed businesses with over $1 million a year in services and other revenue, a surcharge that we used to then lower tuition functionally for families earning $50,000 a year or less. It goes to zero. For families earning up to the state's median income, it's a pretty steep scholarship. We could take a look at adjusting that upwards with particular attention to the larger tech companies who again have done reasonably well during this crisis, so that we don't have to make the kinds of cuts that are going to do some great damage. There's also, second, probably some room in the estate tax, some changes at the federal level that I believe give us some room to run. And third, there's a capital gains tax where I've never understood why we tax the entire proceeds of home sales, but zero of the proceeds of stock sales. I think that is long overdue.
Thank you, Drew. Elaina?
Hello, I would look at the bridge toll money and see if maybe we can use some of that revenue and divert that to some places that we need it. I would also maybe look at the lottery money, because I know that that still brings in significant amounts of revenue. I would not be in favor of just taxing the rich or taxing people just because they have more money. I would want to look at ways to make some cuts and maybe some other programs that maybe aren't needing it as much.
Okay, thank you. Christine?
I think when you're talking about cuts to the budget and you're talking about raising revenue, you need to be looking at the whole thing with a very balanced, big picture approach. So if we don't want to cut services to the developmentally disabled, to nursing homes, to schools, to mental health, to a lot of the other things that everybody on this panel thinks is important, then you have to look at where are we going to get revenue to pay for that. Couple of things. You first want to be really careful about raising taxes or changing tax structures when you're in the middle of a recession. So we want to be careful about how we do that. But let's be really honest. There are people who are making a lot of money. There are businesses that are not suffering in this pandemic. And if we can ask people who can afford it, we can ask businesses that can afford to pay more to help the small businesses, to help people who have lost their jobs, and to help support the services that the most needy are using right now, then I will support a broad range of proposals that may be coming forward.
Okay, thank you. Pam.
One of the things that was disturbing during the COVID pandemic and watching so many of the businesses being shut down was watching people at the state level being paid for staying at home and not working at all. Though that made it very comfortable for them, it was less comfortable for those who are out there and not getting anything. And from what I understand, there's still about 13,000 people who have never received any money from the unemployment that they were lawfully due. I agree with many of you in stating that there should not be severe cuts to some of the needier programs. But there's probably always room for some cutting, because when I worked in the school district, the statement that if you don't spend it all, you're going to lose money is still in place and should not be.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and April, you get to go first on this one, is since availability of an affordable rental or lower cost housing is an issue in the 23rd, what initiatives or approaches would you propose or support in Olympia to increase housing for low and moderate income people?
Well, housing first is just a start, but there are many other needs that really must be addressed. Housing really, we often hear it's about, low income. Housing prices are up, but a lot of the homelessness and that crisis is really impacted by mental health issues. And so you really have to fix the underlying issues before you can really address, we can put temporary Band-Aid fixes on the problem, but it's not going to get fixed until we're addressing the underlying problems. And one of that is the drug addiction, mental health issues. And but when it comes to housing, how I would help in that situation is, well, I would try to work on getting less regulations in the housing industry, which impacts the ability to, I'm going to run out of time, but it impacts the ability to make houses affordably and to help. Yeah, I'm out of time. So I didn't get to the point on that. I'm sorry.
No, it's hard. Drew, you get to go next.
Too much on that one.
Sure, let's look at this in two ways, one from the private sector perspective and one from the public sector perspective. In the legislature, we fund something called the Housing Trust Fund, which a number of people of my church have advocated for full funding of for some time. That provides affordable housing for people with very, very low incomes, and often with a number of other things that are making it hard for them to stay stable. That is good, but that's only a safety net. We also need to build more housing in areas that are zoned, especially for dense residential neighborhoods. And so one of the problems we had early in the crisis is that residential construction was shut down almost entirely. And so I was asking the governor's office pretty early for some, I was hearing from builders saying, like, I can have one sub come one day, I can have another sub come another day. There's ways to do this. I'm happy that we're at that point now. We need to not go backwards to make sure we're still building houses where it is zoned for housing so people have places to live and it's more affordable.
Thank you. Elaina?
Hi, well, I think that Drew and I are on the same page as far as easing up those restrictions on housing, building houses. We need to make building houses easier and more affordable, possibly cut some taxes on the property owners so that the property owners aren't having to raise rent on people with raised taxes. and ease up on those permit fees for the builders and on those wait times.
Okay, thank you. Christine?
Thank you. I want to nod to April. It's hard to solve the housing crisis in a minute, so we'll see what I can throw out there.
We're not hearing you clearly.
Oh, first of all, how's that?
No.
Not good.
No.
Not good.
Well, first of all,
It's like you're echoing.
She's underwater. Yeah.
Yes.
I will pass for the time being. Actually, can I try again? How's that?
No.
Sometimes that happens when somebody else is, like when something's on, like another, like if we, I wonder if we all mute ourselves.
Yeah, could everybody mute?
I think you should probably go out and come back in, maybe.
Yeah, why don't you do that, Christine, and we'll come back to you on this question. Okay, so we'll jump over to Pam.
Since I am in the construction business, I can speak very, very effectively to that. Drew, you are 100% right when you say we need to do a number of things in that residential construction should never have been shut down. One of my major causes is ADU units, accessory dwelling units on properties in cities and areas, and we need to be producing regulations that encourage accessory dwelling units on a lot of properties anywhere. Reward the builders, reward the cities, and definitely reduce the amount of permits and the time it takes to get those permits, because that's the bottom line for the builders and all of the developers. And right now, probably 20 to 30% of the cost of building new facilities is directly related to the permitting process. So anything we can do should be done to reduce that.
Thank you, Pam. Tarra?
Thank you. You know, it all comes down to a lot of it comes down to resources. So I completely support, we do need to do as Drew's church says and fully fund the Housing Trust Fund. It breaks my heart that we are pitting marginalized groups against each other. Sometimes, you know, the Housing Trust Fund says we're going to house chronically homeless people. Other years it's elderly people or survivors of domestic violence. And none of the
Uh-oh. I don't know what's happening tonight, but you're frozen. Tarra.
Oh, am I back? Okay.
You are back.
Great. Sorry, but we do need more supply also. And so as a state, if we had the resources, we could incentivize developers to actually develop, you know, affordable housing units close to public transportation and services, and increase the supply as well. So it comes down to resources. Again, regressive tax system. We need progressive revenue to fund all the things that we really care about.
Thank you. Okay. Christine hasn't come back yet, but we'll give her a chance to answer this question and the following question. But I'm going to move along with the next question. How would you rate our state's response to the pandemic? What, if any, additional steps would you have recommended or not supported in responding to the spread of COVID-19? And Drew, you get to go first.
So I think Governor Inslee, our constituent and our neighbor in Kitsap County, has done a very good job of knowing what he does not know, which is public health and infectious diseases. So he listens to his public health professionals and the modelers at the University of Washington and WSU when he's trying to make decisions. And I have not agreed always with all of them, but the good news about the governor's office is they are open to constructive feedback. So for example, you may remember that when we did the phased reopening, originally only tiny rural counties were allowed to reopen, like Garfield County. I mean, I was immediately in touch with them like, this can't be, right? We have to have some like per capita standard of cases. So it's not just counties where no one lives that can reopen. And we got the guidance that allowed Kitsap County to move to phase 2. Now, so that's positive, and that's been indicative of the governor's approach. I think most of the things where we need to improve, particularly in testing, are largely a national problem. And for better or for worse, it's not something Washington can solve on its own.
Thank you, Drew. Elaina?
Hi, so I would have called back the legislature to session, and I would want to look at the county data and work with the local governments and business owners to see what would work best for those communities, because we've had a lot of businesses die, and I think that that could have been prevented had we come together as leaders and as community and as the business owners to take a look at each community's individual needs.
Okay, thank you. Well, Christine's supposed to go next, and she's not back yet. I'm concerned about that.
Catherine, this is Colette. We're trying to reach her by email and phone to see if she's having difficulties and how we can help her.
Okay, great. Well, we'll go on with this question. Pam?
Would you do me a favor and repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Let's see now, I've got it right here. How would you rate our state's response to the pandemic? What, if any, additional steps would you have recommended or not supported in responding to the spread of COVID-19?
One of the things that I did in the beginning was I looked for scientific resources to give me information on the details of this. The gentleman who created the PCR test clearly indicated that that was not to be used in this kind of testing. Second thing is the area of the use of masking. I've spent a lot of time looking at OSHA experts. They are very highly credentialed professionals, and all of the OSHA documentation back to 1979 is very clear on wearing masks in many of the workplaces. They have to, each individual employee is supposed to be medically checked out first to find out if they are safe to wear a mask, and then they're supposed to be shown how to wear the mask. And so these OSHA experts, these are credentialed OSHA experts, have spoke out loudly against the masks in workplaces.
Okay, thank you. Tarra?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo, that Governor Inslee, in my opinion, has done the best that we can expect of somebody to navigate this crisis without any precedent to follow. It's not been perfect, and I would have done a few things differently. For example, our education, system, and where we are trying to teach all of our children online. I'm a mom. I'm trying to navigate that with my son right now. And there are places where we don't have full internet broadband, right? I want to say thanks to Representative Hansen, who's trying to make that a public utility right now. We need full broadband across our state. There are so many places throughout the state where kids don't even have access, let alone we don't all have meaningful access. If you have a kiddo that has additional needs or has other kinds of challenges, the online stuff isn't working. So giving parents other alternatives, for example, you could choose to forego this year and repeat it next year or something like that. We should have more alternatives for education.
Thank you. April?
Well, so first thing I would have done is I would have called a special session. That should have been done immediately. I think Inslee made a huge error in making a lot of these decisions on his own without the support and guidance of the legislator. And we, like Elaina was saying, there should have been more working with local government to address the crisis per the county. All shut down by the entire state was a drastic and irresponsible action, which impacted our state and will continue to impact our state for years to come. It wasn't necessary to shut everyone down and put everybody at the same level when the crisis was not impacting all the counties at that same level. And going forward, we need to have a better plan of action. And I wanted to talk about how it was impacting education, but I'm out of time.
Okay. Well, Christine, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry to throw you guys off there.
Let's have you answer this question, and then we'll go back to the previous question, so you have a chance for that too. This one was basically, how would you rate our state's response to the pandemic, or would you do anything different?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I think the governor has done as good a job as any governor in the country in terms of dealing with this. There was no playbook, and he has been leading us using science and really taking a lot of partisan political heat, but sticking to the course to keep people safe. We're not going to be able to get businesses reopened and the economy back on track until people feel safe, and we're not going to be able to do that until we have the pandemic under control. What I would have done differently, I think, is, and I have been pushing this since May, is make sure that our communities and all of the counties have the testing that we need. That's been a failure at the national level, but I think that had we been more proactive in May or June, we would have the tests that we need to get the schools reopened and get things under control. So that is that's my main area of critique. Otherwise, we're doing as well as anybody is, I think.
Okay. And
if you want, Catherine, I can quickly say the affordable housing thing, during which I kicked myself off the screen.
Right. Yeah.
Just really quickly, I heard everybody's comments about regulations. Surely there's changes to the Growth Management Act that we need to be looking at, and the legislature is undergoing a review of the Growth Management Act. But as importantly, I think we need to be extremely creative and open-minded about how we're approaching the challenge of affordable housing, which is not homelessness, but affordable housing. So I had two different bills this past legislative session that were from people in our district. One would prohibit local governments from not letting people who are unrelated live together. So there is, for example, in Bellingham, if you're three people who aren't in the same family, you're not allowed to stay in the same house. We need to get rid of laws like that are discriminatory and not practical. Secondly, if our school districts or local governments have surplus lands, we should allow them to do affordable housing if they choose to and if their voters support it. And I had a bill related to that as well this past legislative session. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, got you back in and answered those two questions. Next question. Do you feel the pandemic has exposed major flaws in our healthcare system? What, if anything, can the legislature do to make sure that all residents have adequate health care? Elaina, you get to go first.
Hello, I do believe it has exposed some flaws. We've had different sources say different things about testing sites and the validity of those tests. I think that making sure that the companies that are giving us those tests are on target and are giving us tests that are going to be accurate, because I think that having that accurate data as far as who really has the virus and who does not is super important. And I think that, like, I was watching this video of one of the places, I think it was in Texas, where they talked about the way that they were recording the data. It's super important to have a universal system of testing and making sure that we're documenting that data. And I think we failed there miserably, which has led to a drastic disaster in many areas as far as the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. Christine, you're back up for this one. I'm trying to keep the same order of questions.
Yeah, I would say that the debacle in the White House last week exposed at a national level the inherent unfairness in our healthcare system nationwide. When the most wealthy and the most powerful people in the world have access to life-saving drugs that the rest of us don't have access to, it's a travesty, and it's unconscionable, really. And then for the most powerful people to stand up and say, see, this was no big deal, is misleading and deadly for people, frankly. At a statewide level, we have done a lot in this state that folks in other parts of the country are not, do not have access to, including Medicaid coverage for low-income people. We have balanced billing laws, so the hospitals can't bill you if you show up with COVID. And we have insurance company transparency so that they can't be profiteering off of us during a pandemic like this. Certainly there are flaws that have been exposed, and we'll be working on that when we reconvene in January.
Thank you. Pam? Unmute yourself.
I didn't mute myself, so I apologize. I was muted by the host. One of the things that became extremely apparent was the lack of uniform standards across the United States for the testing. There was no uniform documentation for a number of things, and that is one of the biggest things that should have happened. But when you have a brand new virus that's out there, it can be a little difficult, but it should have been achieved probably before we started ramping up the testing, and that should have been on the hands of the CDC and Dr. Fauci. I would also like to address the fact that there were concerted efforts by people in the industry to absolutely eliminate the use of hydroxychloroquine and zinc and vitamin C, the other vitamins, for the use of treatment of this virus. It's a virus. We have about 400,000 of them in our bodies every day, and we survive. It's a miracle.
Okay. Tarra?
Thank you for the question. You know, as a registered nurse who's worked in this community, both at Harrison Hospital in the emergency room and at a long-term care facility in Paulsbo, you know, I've seen the inequities in our healthcare system up close and firsthand for a very long time, when people have to use the emergency room as their primary care provider because they don't have insurance. It's a travesty to all of us, and it drives up costs for everybody. I will say that the pandemic has really shown us how interconnected we are and how we are only as healthy as our most vulnerable communities. For example, our undocumented communities that do not, don't qualify for many of the programs. However, if our undocumented communities are getting COVID-19, the rest of us are going to get it as well. So I do say that the pandemic has shown us the inequities. I am very excited to follow the work of the Universal Task Force, the Universal Healthcare Task Force in Olympia that's going on right now and chaired by our neighboring Senator Emily Randall. And I hope that we do get to a place where everybody has comprehensive and affordable healthcare.
Thank you. April? Unmute.
So to start, I actually was impacted by how the healthcare system during this crisis, because I actually had a baby during the COVID-19 situation, and there was a lot of concern about, you know, would the baby be taken from me if there was, if I tested, and there wasn't that much security and information. And I found that like there was a lot of inconsistency in what I was being told by a lot of different doctors, and I thought that was kind of an issue, that there wasn't really a really solid plan of action, especially when it came to birthing. But the universal system for testing, I agree with Elaina. There has been a lot of inconsistencies in numbers, which makes it hard to ask the people to trust the numbers and advice concerning healthcare when there is so much inconsistency. Also, a lot of people, don't want to wear the masks and stuff because, they don't trust the numbers. There's not anything solid.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Drew?
So I think just so we're all on the same page, I'm hopeful we all agree that though your body may have many viruses and you're fine, this is not one of those you're fine viruses, right? This is a virus that kills people and causes heart and lung damage. And with over 200,000 Americans dead because of it, let's make sure we take it real seriously, because it's particularly deadly for people who already have underlying health conditions like asthma or diabetes or obesity or who are older. Now, one of the things that the virus has revealed, well, not revealed because it's reasonably clear all along, is just how deep some of those underlying health conditions go. A lot of people have a hard time getting treatment in this country, even though we have expanded Medicaid, even though we have done some good reforms. And what I'm hopeful that we see coming out of this crisis, people are getting used to the idea now that you can have doctor's visits remotely by telemedicine over Zoom. I had one with a family member, 20 minutes in and out, rather than killing a day for a doctor's office. That's the kind of thing we need to take forward and make sure we get care to the people who need it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is, how will you address racial and poverty injustice? Do you feel the Black Lives Matter movement has raised legitimate issues about the fairness of law and justice in our state? And is there any legislation you would like to see passed to bring greater fairness in this area? Christine, you get to go first on this one.
Yes, I am really thankful to the Black Lives Matter movement in our state and the peaceful protests that occurred, particularly throughout Kitsap County, that brought increased awareness of systemic racism in our society and in our state and even locally. And in particular, we will be looking at new legislation that looks at accreditation of law enforcement officers and makes it easier to discipline law enforcement officers. But I want people to know that these efforts are working we're working in coordination with Black Lives Matter activists and law enforcement and the Criminal Justice Training Center, et cetera. Washington State has a history of doing smart criminal justice reform, and I'm very, very excited about some of the opportunities we're going to be seeing in January.
Thank you. Pam? And evidently everybody is muted, so you need to unmute, Pam.
Got it. So we're going to get muted every time, I'm guessing. Criminal justice reform can always use a little bump and a little help. And to that, I can say thank you anytime you raise the awareness about anything, because usually, yes, minorities are incarcerated at a much higher degree than those of us who are Caucasian. A lot of it goes back to education. I grew up dirt poor. Dirt poor. If you lost something, if you broke something, you had no money to replace it. What I did in my life was I spent my time in school very wisely. I learned, I excelled, and I have continued to do that as an adult. That's one of the things that the family system needs to encourage, is putting your best foot forward within the education system.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Tarra?
Thank you so much. Given my background and growing up in generational poverty and having two Black sons, racial injustice is something that I've always been fighting for. It's not just in our criminal legal system. However, that is what Black Lives Matter is highlighting in the particular moment around police accountability. But it really starts in all of the systems where we see racial disparities, which is in the health outcomes for Black women, the educational gap for the opportunity gap for African-American children and other communities of color in our educational system. But it's very much, most disparately noticed in our criminal legal system, which is an area where I have been leading in Washington State and nationally. But any legislation that I look at, I really always want to look through a racial equity lens and seeing who's going to benefit from this, and is it going to make racial disparities worse? And so if you have a piece of legislation that is going to help some, poor white people who are criminalized, but it's going to increase racial disparities, then we need to really look at that and say no.
Okay. April? Unmute.
Sorry about that. I've been bad about that tonight. So first I want to say to Christine, that was actually a good point about Kitsap was very, they did really set an example, the Black Lives Matter here in Kitsap for peaceful protests. And it's too bad, that really we didn't see that same approach around the state and the country. I believe the violence and the riots is an obstruction to progress between those impacted by the injustice. And I believe more efforts to work with law enforcement and to involve them in the solutions rather than the attacks that have been happening against law enforcement. I think it's actually caused more of a divide. It hasn't brought people more together to create solutions. It's caused more divide. And I think also that the first fix, is always in education and offering and making sure that there's that equal opportunity in education, which all children are entitled to.
Thank you, April. Drew?
I absolutely think the Black Lives Matter movement has succeeded in drawing attention and awareness to racial inequities, particularly around police and police accountability. That's why I was at one of the demonstrations in Kitsap County with my mask on and my sign and keeping distance, because it is important to recognize collectively as neighbors, right, that we all have work to do on this and there needs to be some progress. In terms of legislative proposals, fairly quickly after George Floyd's death, I was speaking with some of my Black legislative colleagues. We spun up a Google Doc with about 30 possible ideas to go follow. Ones that are likely to move forward, I hope, led by some of my Black colleagues, would be an independent investigation of a use of force, not by a neighboring law enforcement agency, work on decertification so that law enforcement officers with repeated credible use of force complaints are not on the force anymore, and work on qualified immunity to open doors for civil accountability and justice.
Thank you. Okay, we got through that one. Elaina.
Hello.
I got it.
Okay, so as I'm a minority myself, I'm Native American, Hispanic. My father's family came here from Mexico. My father overcame those obstacles and became a police officer, and every one of his siblings overcame the obstacles that we do see as minorities see, and they all went on to having successful careers and owning homes. However, especially in Kitsap County, we've done a great job of combating racism, and I do not think it's as prevalent as perhaps the media would portray. I do support Black lives. I support Native Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and everyone in between. I'm a former single mother. I spent 7 years on food stamps, and I overcame it. So I know that poverty is possible to overcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, next question. Are you aware of the problem of violent sexual predators being placed and living in family neighborhoods? If so, what are your thoughts on this issue? Pam? Unmute.
Available. There we go. It had to pop up before I could unmute. Yes, I am very aware of the sexual predators being placed in communities. And one of the things that I spoke about repeatedly over the last number of months was that these facilities need to have a 24-hour-a-day person that is in charge. These people should not be living by themselves. They need to have a person there who has the authority to hold them fully accountable for their actions on a daily basis. That means where they're going, what they're doing, whom they are doing it with. And none of these should be located in a residential area that I believe should be, neighbors should be talked to ahead of time before these homes are located in those areas. There needs to be feedback, just like there is with a lot of other issues within individual communities.
Thank you. Tara?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I actually agree with Pam that, it's unfortunate the way that the Paulsbo House came around, and that community members and neighbors were not consulted first. I also understand that, people need to have a place to live. And I would also say that these individuals are still they've been deemed to be civilly committed because they are likely to reoffend. It's a very much different class than a person that has a sex offense and, is not likely to reoffend. So the people that we're talking about in Paulsbo is a concern to me. And I was actually talking to Senator Rolfes the other day and wanted to hear from her because she had legislation last session that was addressing this, and unfortunately didn't move very far. And so I do want to support her effort and her leadership, that she's already been looking at this issue and trying to figure out a way where we can have some restrictions about the homes being placed in residential neighborhoods.
Thank you. April? Unmute.
So this is actually one of my, the issues I've actually been focusing on, one of my issues in my campaign. And it's the less restrictive environment alternative housing that went up in Paulsbo. I've been studying the laws and what would be a good solution. And I think that what we should do is that if I was elected, I would sponsor legislation that would require that the court appoint a community advocate that ensures the rights of the community are upheld, and that person works with the community to make sure that their rights are upheld, like their right to go to the hearings, and that person would be the same as like a guardian ad litem would be, but for the community. And they could bring motions, they could bring emergency motions to have like placement changes or new restrictions put up if there's violations and concerns the community would have concerning the placement.
Okay. All right, Drew?
So what happened in Paulsbo was a massive failure. I mean, there's no other way to go at it. And it was a failure on many levels. And, just the intuitive community reaction, like, maybe you shouldn't have a facility like this near, if I'm remembering correctly, it was near Lions Park, where when my kids were younger, we would take them all the time. Senator Rolfes has been our legislative lead on this, on figuring out different approaches to prevent this from happening again. And I mean, I got 30 seconds left. Maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but like basically no one digs in deeper and pays to solve problems for Kitsap County that come to us from constituents than my colleague, the senator. And so like I have been following her lead on this. I was not happy that her bill did not pass. Look forward to working with her to prevent stuff like this in the future.
Thank you. Elaina?
I am aware that violent sex predators are living in our communities. I'm also aware that in some cases, some sex crimes, including that against children, are not necessarily listed for Washington State as a violent crime. Now, with that said, as a sex abuse survivor myself, I am against sex predators living in our communities. I think that we need to protect our children any and every way possible, because I do not want what happened to me to happen to others. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine?
So I think it sounds like we're all on the same page on this. One, we did have legislation last year to improve the process, the community notification process, and the community decision-making related to the placement of these homes for sexually violent predators who are deemed likely to reoffend. We had legislation. The advocacy group of neighbors in Paulsbo helped draft the legislation. We had a hearing on it. The legislation was bipartisan, and the chair would not let the bill out of the committee. And so I'm hoping that with more legislative effort, we can make some better progress on this. Having been given that setback, I did learn that there is a work group that is set up in the state specifically to look at the issue of offenders coming back into the sexually violent predators coming into the community. That workforce has been activated and will be reporting back to us before December.
Great. Okay, how will you support public schools as they face the challenges of safely and effectively educating students during a pandemic? And we will start with Tarra.
Well, it is a challenging, thing that's going on right now with having to teach our children online. My personal life, I definitely support lots of teachers and students and, try to, encourage them. As a legislator, obviously we have the funding that goes, and then the OSPI is really the entity that implements the funding and a lot of the decisions at the particular moment. But, I wish that we could have different alternatives right now for different kids, especially with kids with special needs and additional needs. I would like to see us right now in this pandemic utilizing our para educators instead of laying people off into other roles that provide technical assistance. A lot of kids are challenged with even utilizing technology, even if they have it. Could they be reutilized instead of being laid off? That would be some of the things that I would advocate for.
Thank you. April? Again, unmute.
I haven't been muting myself. I'm not sure why it's even muting me.
Done by the host, partly because we had the problem with Christine's sound or whatever, but okay, go ahead, April.
So my children, I've actually been really personally impacted by this education system. My son is autistic, and I've been asked constantly, teachers emailing me, messaging me, are you gonna start having your son attend, is your children gonna attend? Well, no, my son is autistic. He has special needs. He has not the ability to focus on an online method of school, and he is receiving no education right now. The state is failing my son, and he was doing very well, and he was making a lot of progress. And I, personally, what we're doing isn't cutting it. And this online method is not working. And I can say that firsthand as a mom. And I'm going to take action about it. And as a state representative, I'm going to look out for those children who are not receiving their education right now.
Thank you, April. Drew?
We have got to get the youngest kids back in school as soon as we can do so safely. You think of trying to teach a kindergartner remote. I don't know how people are doing it. It's heroic work, right? But, so much of what you learn in kindergarten is how to take turns. Whose turn is it to talk? Whose turn is it to listen? How to get along in a group? Where do you sit when it's story time? Can't do that over Zoom. So as soon as we can do this safely, we need to start bringing our youngest kids back. Now, safely, I think, is appropriately a local decision within some broad state guidelines. And just to put a data on it, we're at sort of the high 3% for a test positivity rate in Kitsap County. New York is in the ones. They started talking about closing schools down again when they start hitting the high ones or maybe twos. So we need to do some work to get our infection rate down. And we'll talk about this, I hope, more, which means people need to wear masks. People got to stay away from each other when they can, and people got to go outside when they can. We control whether we create those conditions where you get young people back to school.
Thank you, Drew. Elaina?
Hello. So I would definitely want to look at opening up those schools safely, at least for those younger children and those special needs kids. I have special needs children as well, so I understand the struggle of trying to get a special needs child, a child with ADD, a child with dyslexia, dysgraphia. My child has quite a few needs, and it's really difficult to get her to sit down, especially with me as mom. I know how that relationship with parents can be with their kids. Sometimes kids just don't want to sit down with mom and do their homework, especially not for 3 or 4 hours a day or even longer than that. So I would also want to look at how can we help those kids with computers, because I know that many children are suffering without a computer. I've got a couple at home I need to buy 4. And also the internet service I know is a big issue for some families. Some families can't afford it. So I would look at doing whatever we could to address those specifically needy children and those young children whose brain development is so crucial right now.
Thank you, Elaina. Christine?
We've had for years a debate in the legislature about whether technology was considered essential to basic education or not. And I think this pandemic has clearly shown that technology is something that the state should be helping the districts to provide to every child whose family can't afford technology. Your child's success should not be dependent upon whether a technology levy passes or fails in your school district. And throughout the state, where we don't have good broadband connection, the kids don't even have a chance. It doesn't matter if the school's giving them laptops if they don't have internet at home, because there is no broadband. So a couple of things that we are looking at in the Senate is a high priority on broadband and access to high-speed internet for underserved communities. That's rural and urban. This gap exists throughout the state. We're also looking at not changing the funding formula for the schools so that schools don't get stressed out by the fact that there aren't kids enrolled right now. We have to allow them the resources they need to get the kids back.
Okay, we're gonna continue on with this in the next question that I'm making up in my head right now. So there'll be a little bit more talk about it. But Pam, you get to answer this. How do we support the schools? And unmute yourself.
One of the things that we definitely need to look at is making sure that if we're ever going to do online school again, that not only does the technology need to be available, but the cost of the technology needs to be allowed by hopefully the free market system to come down to a level where all families can afford it. Because if it's available, that's great. If they have the computer, that's great. But if they can't afford to pay for it, they still don't have it. The other issue, as a person who has spent 30 years working with children, one of the primary things that I'm going to talk about, the elephant in the room, and that is the masks. Children learn by observing facial expressions. Right now, even if they're put back into school, they are barred from being able to do that. Children have an amazing ability to learn, but without the major feature of looking at the face, they're losing most of that.
Thank you. Okay, I want to all of you to delve in a little bit more on how do we provide broadband? And it's not just an education issue. It's about what if you're told to work at home and you don't have access to broadband? So it's an economic and an educational issue. So how do we fix it? What do we do? April, any ideas? Unmute yourself. I'm feeling like I'm teaching online now.
You are.
April.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, well, I just made it up. It's sort of what can we do about providing broadband to more people?
Well,
Can we force Comcast and Wave to install it? Can we grab a satellite out of the sky? I don't know. I'm looking for you all to give answers to this.
well, no, we can't. Oh,
Sorry.
It's April's turn. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, we cannot force Comcast to give it. That would be wrong to do. That's not government's place to do. But we can, we should be looking at our education budget. We have to provide facilities for children. That's where they learn it. Well, if our facility is now online, then why are we trying to find new revenue sources and stuff to provide this? We should look where the easiest answer really is. And that is, if our schools are online, then it's time that we start taking money from the buildings are not being, they're being used for some things like meals, and teachers still have their offices in them. But no, we should be taking from some of the facility funds, and we should be providing for the new facility, which is the online form for education.
Thank you, April. Drew?
So if your question's about broadband access, I have a bill for that. There are a number of really goofy state level legislative restrictions on the ability of governments to offer full retail broadband. That's broadband of the kind that goes into our homes so that we can help our kids with their schoolwork, or so we can take our own classes, or so that we can work or do things like this candidates forum. My bill eliminates all of those. This builds on work that Senator Rolfes did with Kitsap PUD some years ago. Kitsap PUD is chomping at the bit to be a partner with us in this effort. Broadband should be a public utility. It should be widely affordable, and it should be widely available. And one way we do that is we allow public governments, including counties and public utility districts, to offer it as a utility, just like sewer, electricity, water, or anything else. And if I am reelected, that is going to be one of my top priorities in the 2021 legislative session.
Thank you. Elaina?
So like April said, I would look at the education budget. Since education is guaranteed by our state constitution, I think that we have to help those families that cannot afford it. I think that we could look at the families the same way that we do the free lunch program or the reduced school lunch program, and possibly subsidize their internet access for them, so that would help create a lot of access to families. And that way we're not just giving out or relying on the government necessarily to give everybody internet, but we are catering to those families that really truly need it. That way we're saving a little bit of money in some areas, not giving it to families that can afford it themselves. But that education budget should go to that, because we have buildings that are not being used right now. I know that some schools have had layoffs, so we could use that funds to help these children. There's no excuse for them to not have internet right now.
Thank you. Christine?
So the question was, how are we going to get broadband or high-speed internet to more Washingtonians? And if I'm reelected, I will be sponsoring the bill Drew outlined in the state Senate. We, years ago, the big cable cut a deal with state government, including then Governor Locke, to prohibit any kind of government competition with the private sector when it comes to providing internet. And we have seen the massive failure in that market in recent years. We literally have people in Kitsap County asking to buy a product that the companies won't sell them because it's too expensive to provide the service down long driveways and rural roads. And that is a situation that exists throughout the state. So we need to break that monopoly, and we need to do it in a way that enhances competitiveness. Secondly, my office was just dealing with somebody when Comcast overestimated how much money it would cost to dig the ditch to their home. So there's that kind of stuff going on that we also need to be regulating more tightly.
Thank you. Tarra?
Yeah, I am very excited about Drew and Christine's leadership and making it potentially a public utility as well. And being able to provide more access to people all across the state who need it. There are places where even if we did have the incentive of it being a public utility, it's still just not present. And so we need to look at public-private partnerships and incentivize building more infrastructure across the state to reach areas where internet is just not accessible, even if you had money. And so I would be in support of looking at, building the last miles of broadband access across our state as well.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to go to closing statements now. And everybody remember to unmute yourself before you speak. And we'll go in the opposite order that we went for opening statements. So I'm looking here now. Okay, so Elaina, you get to go first.
Well, thank you everyone for inviting me, and thank you for everyone who's attending. I have really enjoyed. This is my first debate, so it's been an awesome time, and you all have been wonderful. I hope that you have gotten to know me a little bit, and that you will consider voting for me and supporting me. I am a stay-at-home mom, which was one of the reasons my party asked me to run, because I will be available to my constituents year-round, with the exception of hopefully a vacation somewhere sometime this next year. And I've had a really wonderful night just answering these questions, and I've learned a few things. It's been great talking with Senator Rolfes and the other candidates. It's just been a great first experience for me. Thank you so much for being kind and welcoming. Appreciate you all.
Okay, thank you. Drew?
Thank you, Catherine, for doing such a great job moderating, to the league for doing a really amazing job staging this all up, and to my fellow candidates for running for office. I am hopeful that we are going to get through this current crisis. I think we will, but I think we all have to keep doing, in many ways, what we have been doing. And that's really what I want to focus on. I mean, in the limited time that I have to close, like, we know a lot more than we did in March. You know, when the Secretary of Health briefed us in March, the directions were wash your hands, don't touch your face, you know, don't touch elevator buttons. Well, now we know from Missouri and from other countries and from other states that masks work. We know that if we keep away from other people, we lower the likelihood that we will transmit the virus. And we know that being outside is a lot safer than being inside. And look, I mean, we govern by the consent of the governed, right? The way that Kitsap County is going to emerge out of this phase 2 faster than the rest of the state is if we keep acting responsibly and pulling together. We do that, we're going to have a lot better 2021 than we had in 2020. And as a state legislator, I feel like my role is to serve that effort, to encourage people to act right and be responsible, and we'll make sure opportunities are around for people to keep making money, having jobs, and supporting their families, which is what we all try to do in this county. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Drew. April?
There you go. I started with unmuting. Okay, to start, I wanted to address, well, it says 57. Don't I get 2 minutes?
No, it's 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Okay. So to start off, I'm going to add something before my closing remarks that I wanted to touch on. Children have different learning styles. Online cannot be adapted to all learning styles. This is something I've learned from my years in early learning. I was an early learning professional, have an education in that field. The system we have right now is not meaningful education for our children. And there is no solution other than reopening our schools. Our society is closing a blind eye to what is obvious, and that is the denial of education to children throughout the state. I'm a mother. My children matter. Everybody's children matter. And I'm going to, if I'm elected, I'm going to advocate and draw a line for our children. And that is, I'm going to get them back to school. The election is about restoring balance in Olympia. That's what it is to me. It's about restoring balance in Olympia, advocating for small businesses, reviving our economy, and protecting constituents from an overbearing government. I believe that as a state representative, it will be my role to represent the best interest of constituents by protecting their individual liberties and voting with a responsible stance on all issues. We need change in Olympia that is balanced and fiscally responsible for Washington. If you give me your vote for state representative, I will work with diligence and dedication to be that change. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Tarra?
Well, thank you so much again to the League of Women Voters, all of the candidates who are running and putting yourselves out there, and everyone who took time to watch tonight. You know, I'm running because I love my community. I love this place that I grew up in, and have been able to find a second chance and come back after a lot of suffering in my life. I also think that I am the most qualified to run for this particular position at this particular moment in history when we are facing an intersectional civil rights crisis, a health crisis, and an economic crisis. As a former nurse, I know the inequities in our healthcare system, and I will not stop fighting until every single person in our community has comprehensive and accessible healthcare. As a civil rights attorney and the mother of 2 Black sons, and a national leader in the fight for criminal justice reform, I've already been leading in our state on solutions that will address this current social unrest and systemic racism. As a person who overcame poverty, I've needed a hand up by utilizing government assistance, and I also know how to make ends meet in a strict budget. I also know the value of a good job, and I'll stand with our working families and continue fighting for the most vulnerable amongst us. I've been endorsed in this race from over 50 elected officials, from Governor Inslee and Senator Patty Murray, all the way down to city council members on every single city. And it's because they know that I'm going to stand up there and fight for our community and give it my all. So if you'd like to connect more, my number is 360-649-8378. And also my website is electtarassimmons.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for allowing us to have this wonderful forum tonight, in spite of some of the technical difficulties. But I would like to highlight one of the things that has become apparent during this COVID situation, and that is with children, the money perhaps should follow the child. If the child is homeschooled, give more of those resources to the parents so that they can do the things that are necessary. One of the things that my husband and my wonderful sons have done during this summer was to build a single room schoolhouse for some of my grandchildren to attend school in. They have had to jump through a lot of hoops to find the resources that would work for them to be able to do some online schooling and to jointly manage one of the children who is going to Green Mountain Elementary, as well as being in the other parent's home and doing work with children who are strictly schooled online and trying to merge those programs together. That has been an amazing situation for my son and my daughter-in-law, and they are doing a fabulous job. Absolutely incredible job with it. And that's why I think that more of those resources need to go with the child to the parents if that's where the children are now going to be educated. Thank you very much. And let's all enjoy the election season as it comes to an end.
All right. Okay, Christine.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for organizing this, and thank you, candidates. It was actually a pleasure to spend a couple of hours tonight with all of you, listening to different ideas and just watching how we all respond. I want to thank the voters of the 23rd Legislative District for letting me do this job. It has been a huge honor, and I'm hoping that I'll have your vote and I'll be reelected in January. But in the meantime, I want people to know that I work really hard. I consider this a full-time job, and that throughout this pandemic, I have been working with state agencies, with our community, with our county and local elected leaders, and with elected officials from across the country to figure out how to navigate these waters, rein in our government spending efficiently, maximize our usage of the money that Congress has sent us, and just get us through this to the best that we can. I am confident that Washington is going to come out of this stronger than when we went in, because we have a track record of doing that. For the last 3 years, I've been the budget writer for the Senate, and we have done our work on time. We have the only 4-year balanced budget in the country, and we have the highest bond ratings of any state in the country. We are in a very, very strong place to take this pandemic on, to protect our public health, and to get our economy moving again. So I hope I can continue to have people's trust. And if you need more information about me, it's electchristine.com. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I need to say something, and Tarra and April, you heard this at the primary forum, but you all make me so proud to be a resident, a citizen of the 23rd Legislative District. You all disagreed on things, but you weren't disagreeable. Nobody yelled or interrupted, and I just congratulate you on all of that and say that you really do make me proud. Well, then the other thing and I wanted to thank the Kitsap Library System, because they publicize this through their online messages and things. So that helped a lot. And the last thing I want to leave you with is just to show you how important the League of Women Voters feels and believes that the power of vote is very strong. We have our own masks. Can you see it? Ah. There we go. Okay. And thank you all so much for participating. It's been a fun evening. Go put your feet up and relax a bit.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.